The soft chime above the door of Heaven's Aroma jingled one last time for the day as Mitchell wiped down the final table. The air smelled of roasted beans, caramel syrup, and cinnamon, scents that lingered in the little coffee shop long after the customers had gone. Outside, dusk was settling over the small street, painting the windows with streaks of orange and purple. Mitchell adjusted her apron, her lips curved in the smile that she had worn all day, the same smile she wore every day. Customers loved her for it. The cheerful black woman who made everyone feel at home with her warmth, her laughter, and her uncanny ability to remember their favorite orders. But now, with the shop empty, her smile faded like a candle being snuffed out. She glanced at the framed picture hanging by the counter. A little girl with bright eyes and two braided pigtails grinned back at her, holding a mug almost too big for her hands. "Mama's helper," the caption read in Mitchell's careful handwriting. Her daughter, Liana, 7 years old. Gone far too soon. Mitchell's throat tightened. She drew a deep breath, holding it, willing herself not to crumble the way she did every night when the world wasn't watching. She straightened the chairs, stacked the mugs, polished the counter a second time even though it was spotless. Anything to keep her hands moving. Finally, with no more excuses left, she sat on one of the bar stools staring at the picture again. A soft hum escaped her lips, the same lullaby she had sung to Liana night after night in the hospital. Her voice was low at first, shaky, but soon it rose gently, filling the empty shop with warmth. It was her ritual, her way of grieving without breaking. By day, she was all light and laughter. By night, she was a mother still mourning her child. Across town, in a penthouse that stretched above the skyline, Oscar Blake sat in silence, staring at the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was a man used to commanding boardrooms, buying out corporations, and bending markets to his will. Billionaire, tycoon, visionary. Those were the names the media called him. But tonight, none of those titles mattered. His glass of whiskey sat untouched beside him. His tie hung loose, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked like a man stripped of armor. On the table lay a photograph face down. He didn't need to turn it over. He knew what it showed. His wife, Clara, laughing in the sunshine. His son, Leo, climbing onto his shoulders, messy hair falling into his eyes. That picture was the last taken before the accident. 3 years ago, the car crash had stolen them both from him, and with them, it had stolen his heart. Oscar closed his eyes. He hadn't cried in years. He had buried himself in work instead, filling his days with meetings and contracts, his nights with silence and shadows. He had promised himself he would never allow his heart to open again. Loving deeply only meant losing deeply, and he couldn't endure that again. Yet tonight, for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't want to sit in that apartment drowning in memories. He loosened his cuffs, slipped on a simple jacket, and for the first time in months, left without his driver, without security. Just him, walking aimlessly through the cool evening streets. His steps carried him down quieter roads until a small shop caught his attention. Heaven's Aroma. The name struck him in a way he couldn't describe. Something about it tugged at him. Heaven, aroma, comfort. He slowed, hands in his pockets, and finally pushed the door open. The shop was nearly dark, lit only by the soft glow of a few hanging lamps. It smelled rich, sweet, inviting. But it was empty. Oscar frowned, glancing around at the neatly stacked chairs, the framed picture on the wall, the cozy atmosphere. He was about to turn and leave when he heard it. A voice, soft at first, then stronger. A woman's voice singing. The melody was haunting and tender, each note carrying something raw, something that reached beneath his defenses. Oscar froze. For the first time in years, he felt his chest ache with something other than bitterness. He listened, transfixed, until the singing stopped and the sound of light footsteps approached. Mitchell emerged from the back, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes widening when she saw him. She hadn't realized anyone was still inside. "Oh, I'm sorry. We're closed for the day," she said quickly, her polite smile returning. Oscar straightened, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in his expensive jacket and polished shoes. "I thought you were open," he said, his deep voice betraying the awkwardness he rarely felt. "I just wanted some coffee." Her smile softened, but she shook her head. "I've already shut down the machines. I'm sorry." He gave a small nod, turning toward the door. Something about his broad shoulders, his weary expression made her pause. Something in her heart told her to stop him. "Wait," she called. "I'll make you one. Just give me a minute." He turned back, surprised. She had already moved behind the counter, switching on the machine with quick hands. The hum of the grinder filled the silence. As she worked, Oscar found himself watching her. She moved with practiced grace, her face serene but with shadows hidden in her eyes. She looked nothing like the women he usually encountered in his world, polished socialites and calculating executives. There was something real about her, something human. Mitchell set the steaming mug before him with a smile. "Here you go. My last cup for the night." He wrapped his hands around it, inhaling the warmth. "Thank you," he murmured. For a moment, silence lingered between them, broken only by the soft hiss of the machine cooling down. "You run this place alone?" Oscar asked finally. "Yes," Mitchell replied, tucking a braid behind her ear. "It keeps me busy. I like it that way." He nodded. "It's a nice shop." "Thank you," she said, her smile polite, though her eyes flickered briefly to the picture of her daughter before she caught herself and looked away. They exchanged a few more words. Simple, almost meaningless small talk about the weather, the neighborhood, the taste of the coffee. But there was an ease in it that surprised them both. Oscar finished his cup slowly, savoring it longer than he needed to. For reasons he couldn't name, he didn't want to leave. The air here felt different, warmer, safer. Finally he rose, setting the mug gently on the counter. "Good night," he said, his tone softer than it had been in years. "Good night," Mitchell replied, watching him go. When the door shut behind him, she exhaled, leaning against the counter. "Why did I even make him coffee?" she whispered to herself, shaking her head with a half-smile. She turned off the last light, locked up, and stepped into the night, unaware that her voice had just reached a man who had long forgotten what comfort sounded like. And across town, Oscar walked back to his penthouse with a strange weight lifted from his chest. The sound of her song lingered in his ears, haunting and healing all at once. For the first time in years, he didn't go straight to his glass of whiskey. He sat in silence, replaying the moment, wondering why the name Heaven's Aroma had called to him, and why the woman inside had stirred something he thought was long dead. Both of them went to bed that night carrying the same unspoken thought. Perhaps fate had just taken its first step. Oscar Blake had never been the kind of man to visit the same place twice unless it served a purpose. His life revolved around schedules, precision, and efficiency. But over the following week, his evenings began to follow a pattern he hadn't planned. When the city lights dimmed and his penthouse felt too hollow, his feet carried him back to Heaven's Aroma. He told himself it was only for the coffee. Mitchell made it smoother and richer than anywhere else. That was the excuse he gave himself the first night he returned. The second night, he admitted privately that the coffee wasn't really the reason. It was her voice. The memory of her singing had wrapped itself around his mind. A simple melody, soft but piercing, had slipped past the walls he had built around his heart. He wanted, no, he needed, to hear it again. Mitchell noticed him the moment he pushed open the door late one evening. The chime above the entrance startled her, and she glanced up from wiping a counter. "You again?" she said with a teasing smile. "I'm beginning to think you don't like coffee shops that are actually open during the day." Oscar smirked faintly, something he hadn't done in years. "Maybe I just prefer quiet ones." She laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Quiet ones, huh? You mean you prefer interrupting me when I'm about to close, something like that?" She turned on the machine again, though it was already shut down for the night. Somehow, for him, she didn't mind restarting it. As the grinder whirred, Oscar leaned against the counter, watching her with the same calm fascination he couldn't shake. When she set his mug down, he didn't drink right away. Instead, he asked, "Do you always sing when the shop is empty?" Mitchell froze for a second, then lowered her eyes. "You heard me?" "Yes," he said softly. It was beautiful. Her lips curved into a small, wistful smile. "It's just something I do. Helps me feel less alone." Oscar didn't reply, but his gaze lingered. For a man who had spent years drowning himself in silence, the thought of her singing away her loneliness struck him deeply. Over the next few nights, a rhythm formed. Oscar would arrive late, long after her last customer had gone. Sometimes they spoke only briefly while he sipped his coffee. Other times they shared easy small talk that lasted until midnight. He rarely asked for music, but Mitchell often sang anyway, quietly at first, then more freely when she realized he truly listened. One night, as she sang a lullaby, he found himself closing his eyes, breathing more easily than he had in years. The notes stirred memories he had long tried to bury. Clara's soft laughter, little Leo's giggles. He should have pushed them away. Instead, he let them come. When the song ended, Oscar remained still, eyes closed, as though savoring something fragile. Mitchell tilted her head, studying him. "You look like someone who understands what it means to miss a piece of yourself," she said quietly. Oscar opened his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice rougher than he intended, he asked, "How did you know?" Mitchell hesitated, then set her rag aside and leaned against the counter across from him. Her usual smile faltered, replaced by an honesty she rarely revealed. "Because I do too." The room stilled. Oscar leaned forward slightly, sensing a truth hovering at the edge of her words. She took a shaky breath. "I had a daughter, Liana. She was 7. Her voice softened, almost breaking. She loved this shop, called herself my little assistant. Said when she grew up, she'd own the biggest bakery in town so I could rest." Her eyes shone with tears, but she smiled anyway. The smile of someone who had practiced hiding pain behind light. "She got sick last year. The doctors tried everything, but—" Mitchell's voice trailed off, and she pressed her lips together, swallowing the grief. Oscar's chest tightened. Something in him broke open at her words, and before he could stop himself, he whispered, "I lost my wife and son." Her eyes flicked to his. "Car accident," he continued, forcing out the words he had refused to say aloud for years. 3 years ago, they were gone instantly. And so was I. At least the part that mattered. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unshed tears and shared understanding. Neither of them reached for empty words of comfort. They knew too well that some wounds didn't heal with phrases. Instead, they sat in the ache together. Two souls who finally dared to admit they weren't whole. Mitchell blinked away her tears and whispered, "Funny, isn't it? We smile all day so no one sees the cracks. Then at night we fall apart." Oscar let out a humorless laugh. "And sometimes, if we're lucky, someone else is there to see it." Their eyes met. For the first time in years, Oscar felt something stir in his chest. Not pain, not anger, but connection. From then on, their conversations grew deeper. Mitchell showed him the small corner of the shop where she had framed one of Liana's drawings, a crooked but cheerful sketch of the coffee shop with the words, "Mommy's Cafe," written above it. "She made this while waiting for me to close one night," Mitchell explained softly. "I promised her it would hang here forever. She thought it was the funniest thing that I actually kept that promise." Oscar studied the drawing, his jaw tightening. He could almost hear Leo's voice, could almost feel Clara's hand in his. He swallowed hard, but instead of pushing the memory away, he let it come. "You're brave," he said finally. Mitchell shook her head. "No, I just don't want her forgotten." Oscar didn't reply, but something inside him shifted. For years he had locked away every reminder of his family, thinking it would shield him from pain. Yet here was this woman who honored her daughter's memory daily, even when it hurt. And somehow she radiated warmth, not bitterness. That night, for the first time in years, Oscar laughed. It wasn't much, just a small chuckle when Mitchell teased him about how serious he always looked, but it felt strange and foreign, like a muscle long unused. Mitchell's heart fluttered at the sound, though she quickly masked it. They began to share more of themselves, stories of their families, little jokes, bits of philosophy about grief and resilience. And with every night, the invisible wall between them crumbled piece by piece. One late evening, the shop bathed in soft lamplight. Mitchell sang again, her voice carrying the same lullaby. Oscar sat at his usual table, sipping his coffee slowly, his gaze never leaving her. When she finished, silence filled the room. She busied herself with wiping down the counter, but when she turned, she found him standing closer than usual. "Mitchell," he said quietly. Her name sounded different in his voice, gentler, almost reverent. She looked up, her heart thudding unexpectedly. He hesitated for a moment, then reached out. His hand brushed against hers on the counter. The touch was tentative, almost questioning, as though he was asking permission. Mitchell froze. 1,000 thoughts swirled. Fear of losing again. Fear of opening herself. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw not a billionaire, not a stranger, but a man who understood her pain. Slowly, she let her fingers remain beneath his. The air between them shifted. The grief that had bound them now wove into something new, fragile, unspoken, but alive. That night, as Oscar walked back to his penthouse, he realized he had lingered longer than ever before. And for once, the silence of his apartment didn't suffocate him. Instead, it carried an echo of her voice, her smile, and the warmth of her hand in his. And Mitchell, locking up the shop, pressed her palm to her chest where his hand had touched hers. For the first time in a long time, her tears weren't only of sorrow. They carried the trembling spark of hope. Both knew something had changed. Both feared it, but neither could deny it. The night Mitchell allowed Oscar's hand to rest over hers, something shifted between them. It was subtle, almost unspoken, but undeniable. After that evening, the air in Heaven's aroma carried a new electricity whenever he entered. Their grief was still there, like shadows lingering in the corners, but now those shadows weren't as heavy. There was light between them, a fragile but steady glow. Oscar began to spend more and more time at the coffee shop. At first, he visited only at night, but soon he stopped by in the late afternoons too, sometimes surprising Mitchell by catching her before she locked the doors. He still claimed it was the coffee, but Mitchell had stopped believing that excuse. "You do realize," she teased one evening as she poured his mug, "that you've had more of my coffee this month than anyone else in town?" "Maybe I'm just loyal," Oscar replied, leaning against the counter. "Or maybe I don't like change." Mitchell smirked. "Or maybe you like free entertainment. I see the way you look at me when I sing." Oscar raised an eyebrow, but for the first time in years, his lips curved into a full smile. "Guilty," he admitted. Their laughter filled the shop, a sound that startled them both with how natural it felt. Slowly, cautiously, their friendship grew into something deeper. Oscar stayed longer after closing, helping her stack chairs, wiping down tables, sometimes walking her home even though her apartment was only a block away. Mitchell began to look forward to his footsteps at the door, to the warmth of his gaze, to the way his presence made the nights less lonely. One evening, as the lamps cast a golden glow, Oscar confessed something he hadn't told anyone. "I never kept anything of theirs," he said, his voice low. He sat at his usual table, staring into his untouched coffee. "Clara, Leo, after the accident. I couldn't bear it. I packed it all away, the photos, the clothes, even Leo's toys. I thought if I removed the reminders, maybe the pain would dull. But it never did." Mitchell sat across from him listening, her heart aching at the rawness in his voice. "I come here," he continued, looking up at her. "And you? You have her picture on the wall, her drawing in the corner. You carry her memory every day. I don't know how you do it. You're braver than me." Mitchell reached across the table and touched his hand gently. "It's not bravery, Oscar. It's love. Keeping her memory alive doesn't make the pain disappear, but it makes me feel like she's still here somehow. Like her joy didn't just vanish." Oscar swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He hadn't let anyone comfort him in years, yet Mitchell's words, her warmth, broke through the cracks. "Maybe I need to learn that from you," he murmured. And for the first time since Clara and Leo's deaths, Oscar wept openly. Mitchell slid into the chair beside him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders, and let him grieve. In that moment, two broken souls found healing in each other's embrace. As weeks turned into months, their bond deepened. They shared quiet dinners in the shop, swapped stories of their past, and even laughed at small, silly things that once would have felt impossible. Oscar began to introduce Mitchell to pieces of his world. He took her to a charity gala one evening. Though she resisted at first, she wore a simple but elegant dress, and though she felt out of place among the polished crowd, Oscar never let go of her hand. His friends and business associates whispered, but Oscar didn't care. Later that night, back in the coffee shop, Mitchell admitted, "I don't belong in that world of yours." Oscar cupped her face gently, his eyes steady. "My world hasn't felt like home in years. This shop, this feels like home." Her heart melted, and for the first time Mitchell let herself believe she could love again. Their romance unfolded quietly, tenderly, far from the noise of the world. In Heaven's Aroma, they weren't a billionaire and a small business owner. They were simply Oscar and Mitchell, two people who had known unbearable loss and were learning to love again. It was a rainy evening when Oscar finally asked the question. Mitchell was humming to herself while wiping down the counter when she turned and saw him standing in the middle of the shop, his suit jacket gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked nothing like the polished tycoon in the newspapers. He looked like a man stripped bare, vulnerable yet steady. In his hand was a small velvet box. "Mitchell," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't want to just visit here every night. I don't want this place to be the only space where I can breathe. I want you. All of you. The smiles, the songs, the pain, the joy. I want to carry your memories as much as you've carried mine." Her hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "I know we're both scarred, I know we've lost, but I believe we can build something new together." So, he opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Mitchell's tears spilled over as she nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, Oscar. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and in the quiet of Heaven's Aroma, with the rain pattering softly against the windows, they sealed their promise with a kiss, gentle, healing, and filled with new beginnings. Their wedding was held in grand style. Mitchell wore a gown that made her glow, and Oscar couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him. For the first time in years, he felt whole. When they exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye among the guests. Both spoke not only of love but of healing, of honoring the past while building a future together. For Mitchell, it was the moment she realized she didn't have to grieve alone anymore. For Oscar, it was the moment he allowed love to enter his heart again, without fear. A year later, their home was filled with laughter again. Mitchell cradled two tiny bundles in her arms, a boy and a girl, their twin miracles. Oscar stood beside her, tears streaming down his face as he touched their little hands. When Mitchell looked down at them, she whispered, "Liana would have loved you both." Oscar kissed her forehead, his voice thick with emotion. "Clara and Leo would have too." In that moment, past and present wove together. Their lost loved ones would never be forgotten. But now, they had a future worth holding on to. One evening, as the twins slept peacefully in their bassinets, Mitchell found herself singing again in the shop. But this time, she wasn't alone. Oscar sat nearby, gently rocking one twin while the other stirred softly in his arms. The melody was no longer just a lullaby of grief. It was a song of hope, love, and new beginnings. The shop, once a place of silent tears, now rang with life and laughter. Heaven's Aroma had become what its name promised, a place where heaven touched earth, where broken souls were mended, where love was brewed alongside coffee. Oscar watched his wife, his heart swelling. For years he had thought he was incapable of feeling joy again. But here, in this little shop with Mitchell and their children, he finally understood. Love never truly died. It only waited for the right song to awaken it again. And together, hand in hand, Mitchell and Oscar began their new life, their story no longer one of loss, but of redemption, healing, and love reborn. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your love, comments, and shares mean everything to me. Grateful for each of you. Let's keep growing together. With love from